This story was sent in by Chris from Manchester, England. He says it happened 5 years ago. And even now, he still can't sleep through a full night. My name's Chris. I'd never sent anything to a horror channel before, but I can't keep this to myself anymore. It's been 5 years since the strangest, most frightening months of my life, and every time I close my eyes, I still hear the sound that started it all. It was winter in Manchester, the kind that soaks through every layer of clothing. My parents worked long night shifts, so it was mostly me and my little sister, Megan. She was 9 at the time, bright and restless, always humming to herself. One December night, I woke up to that same humming, but it sounded wrong. It wasn't the cheerful tune she usually sang. It was slower, lower, like she was copying someone else. I went to her door, thinking she'd fallen asleep with her tablet on. But the room was dark. She was sitting upright in bed, eyes open, whispering. I remember whispering, "Meg, you okay?" She didn't answer. Her lips were moving, but there was a space between the sounds, like pauses for someone else to respond. I stepped closer, and that's when she smiled. Not a sleepy smile, a slow, stiff one that didn't belong on a 9-year-old. Then she said, perfectly calm, "He's hungry, Chris." I flicked the light on, and she blinked like she'd just woken up. "What?" she mumbled. "Why are you in here?" I told her she'd been talking in her sleep, but she looked confused, then scared. She said she'd had a dream about the attic door opening. We didn't even have an attic door you could open. The crawl space above our hallway ceiling had been sealed years ago. The next morning, I checked anyway. The panel above the hallway ladder was slightly ajar. Mum said maybe it shifted from the cold. Dad said maybe I was imagining things. But over the next week, things kept happening. We'd wake up to footsteps in the ceiling, objects moved, a spoon balanced upright on the table, a row of toy animals lined up along the window ledge facing outside. Megan started leaving her room to sleep in mine. She said there was breathing behind the wall. One night, she shook me awake, trembling. "He keeps calling my name," she whispered. "Who?" "The man upstairs." I told her it was just pipes. But then I heard it too, something dragging slowly across the ceiling. The fear really began the night the power went out. The whole street went dark, except our house. Our lights flickered, then glowed a deep yellow-orange. Like candlelight, I ran to the breaker box, but the switches were fine. In the kitchen, the air was freezing, my breath white, and right there on the counter sat one of Megan's dolls. Its porcelain hand pressed into the frost on the surface. Grabbed the doll to move it and realized the handprint wasn't melting. It stayed, etched in the frost like it had burned cold into the counter. That's when Megan called from upstairs, "Chris, he's here." I rushed up. She was standing in the hallway pointing to the attic hatch. It was wide open, swinging gently even though there was no draft. "Mum." "Dad!" I shouted, but their car wasn't in the drive. They were on the late shift. I turned back to Megan, but she wasn't looking at the hatch anymore. She was staring past me, down the hallway toward my room. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't let him touch you." The light bulb above us popped. Everything went black. When power returned, we were in the living room. I don't even remember carrying her downstairs, but she was sobbing, clutching my shirt. The clock said 3:17 a.m. For the next few days, nothing unusual happened. No noises, no flickering. Megan started to smile again. I almost convinced myself we'd just had a nightmare. Then our neighbor, Mrs. Clayton, knocked on our door. She's an older woman, lives 2 houses down. She asked if we'd been leaving our lights on in the attic at night. I told her there was no bulb up there. She frowned. "Well, someone's up there. I see a light moving every night around 3. That was the first time I noticed the bags under her eyes. She said she could hear knocking through her walls sometimes, like it was echoing along the row of terraced houses. I went cold. Our houses shared part of a roof line. That evening, I waited. I left all the lights off and sat in the hallway with a flashlight. At 3 a.m., there it was, 3 distinct knocks from above. Then a pause, then 3 more. Between them, a sound like breath drawn through teeth. I aimed the flashlight up at the hatch. Heart pounding. The beam caught dust swirling down. Something had moved up there. I climbed halfway up the ladder. The air smelled of iron and damp wood. "Megan?" I whispered, though I knew she was asleep behind me. No answer. Then the flashlight flickered. For a split second, I saw fingers, not mine, gripping the edge of the hatch from inside. By the time I screamed and dropped the light, they were gone. When Mum and Dad came home that morning, I told them everything. They didn't believe me until they saw the hatch. The edge of it had deep scratches, as if someone had tried to carve something into the wood. You could just make out letters. MEG. Dad sealed it shut with screws. He even painted over it. For a while, it was quiet again. Then Megan started drawing. She'd sit on the floor for hours, sketching the same shape over and over. A tall man with no face, but where the mouth should be. There were marks, 3 short vertical lines. She said that's how he talked. Weeks passed. Every night at 3:17 a.m., I'd wake to the same whisper from her room. "He's hungry." It became routine. I stopped sleeping. Then came the night that changed everything. It was snowing heavily outside, covering the streetlights in orange haze. Mum and Dad were out again. I checked every lock twice before lying on the couch, determined to stay awake. Around 2:45 a.m., I heard movement upstairs. Slow footsteps dragging, but this time, they weren't above, they were on the stairs. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. "Megan," I called softly. No answer. The footsteps paused halfway down, then a whisper. "Chris, help me." I ran to the bottom of the stairs. She was standing there, pale, eyes wide. Her hair looked damp, like she'd been outside. I asked what happened. She pointed toward the back door and said, "He told me to let him in." The latch was turned. Snow had drifted inside in a thin trail. Leading toward the kitchen, I followed it, every muscle in my body shaking. The trail stopped beside the counter, the same spot where that frozen handprint had been weeks ago. Only now there was another handprint beside it. Larger. The next morning I convinced myself I'd imagined the second handprint. I scrubbed the counter until my hands hurt. But the faint outline stayed, like the cold had bitten through the surface. Mum said it was just watermarks. Dad blamed the old pipes, but Megan wouldn't eat, wouldn't play. She'd sit at the window as if she was waiting for someone to appear in the snow. That night, I heard her whispering again. I pressed my ear to her door and caught fragments of words. "You promised. You said he could stay." Then silence. When I went in, she was asleep, but her pillow was turned upside down and damp with melted frost. Over the next week, things became stranger. Lights flickered whenever Megan entered a room. My phone alarm kept resetting itself to 3:17 a.m. And once, when I opened her wardrobe to put away laundry, every item of clothing was hung backward. Zippers and buttons turned to the wall. I started recording audio at night. The first 2 nights just static. On the third, I caught something else. 3 sharp knocks, a pause, then a whisper that sounded like my name stretched into a sigh. "Chris's." I played it for Mum. She told me to delete it. She looked terrified, though she tried to hide it. A few days later, our neighbor, Mrs. Clayton, stopped me on the street. She said, "Chris, there's a man standing in your sister's window at night." I told her that was impossible. Megan's room faced the backyard, and no one could reach that window without a ladder. She swore she'd seen him more than once. Tall, thin, no features, like a shadow made of fog. That evening I nailed the curtains shut. Still, at 3:17 a.m. I woke to the sound of fabric tearing. When I turned on the light, the curtain nails lay on the floor. The window was open just an inch, and the air smelled like wet soil. The next day at school I fell asleep in class. My teacher sent me to the nurse and she called home. When I got back, Megan was sitting in the kitchen coloring a sheet of paper. It wasn't a picture this time. It was writing. Rows of letters and symbols. At the top she'd written, "He lives where the breath turns white." When I asked what that meant, she smiled faintly. "He says you'll see soon." That night I dreamt I was in the attic, The light bulb swung above me, and on the beams carved into the wood was that same phrase. When I woke up, my hands were covered in fine dust, and there were splinters under my nails. I decided to go up there for real. In the afternoon, while Megan was at a friend's house, I borrowed Dad's drill, unscrewed the panel, and pushed it open. The air that came out was cold enough to fog my breath. I shone a flashlight inside. The attic was mostly empty. Old boxes, a cracked mirror, and something wrapped in canvas leaning against the far wall. When I pulled the canvas away, I saw a painting, a crude portrait of a man in a long coat, featureless face, 3 black slashes where the mouth should be. On the back of the canvas, someone had written a date, 1917. I brought it down, showed it to Mum. Her face went pale. She said when we moved in, the previous owner told her to leave the attic sealed. The old owner's daughter had vanished there during a snowstorm in 1917. That night, Megan wouldn't speak to me. She just kept drawing that same man over and over. When I tried to take the pencil away, she whispered, "He said you shouldn't have touched his picture." Then a dragging sound, moving slowly toward the top of the stairs. I crept out of my room, every step creaking. When I reached the hallway, I saw the attic hatch, locked, sealed, painted over, shaking slightly, like something inside was pushing against it. The screws began to turn by themselves, one by one, dropping to the floor with metallic clicks. Then silence. I ran to Megan's room. She was gone. Her window was open again, snow blowing in. Outside, in the whiteness of the garden, were 2 sets of footprints, small ones leading away from the house, and larger ones following. I grabbed my coat and ran barefoot through the snow, calling her name. The tracks led toward the line of trees behind the estate. Halfway there, I heard a voice, hers, calling back softly, "Chris, it's okay, he's not cold anymore." When I found her, she was standing beneath a tree, looking up. On a low branch hung the old canvas painting, swaying gently in the wind. The figure on it seemed different now, the black slashes wider, almost smiling. I pulled Megan back toward the house. She didn't resist, but she kept looking over her shoulder. That night, she slept without a sound. For the first time in months, the house stayed silent. The next morning, the footprints in the snow had disappeared, melted completely, except for one thing. Beside the back door, pressed into the ice, was a perfect handprint. Larger than any of ours and still slowly steaming in the cold air, as if whoever left it had been burning hot. For a few days after that, nothing happened. The air in the house felt lighter, as if whatever had been there was gone. But it didn't last. One night I came home from work to find the kitchen light on and Megan sitting at the table. She wasn't drawing this time. She was staring at the empty chair across from her. When I asked who she was talking to, she whispered, "He misses you." Something in her voice made my stomach twist. I checked every door and window, locked. Still, I could feel a draft moving through the house, a breath that didn't belong. Later that night, I found the painting again. I'd burned it days earlier in the garden, watched it crumble into ash. But it was sitting on my bed, frame unmarked, dusted with snow. Across the bottom edge, in fresh paint, was a new message. "He lives where the breath turns white." I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I took the painting and drove to the edge of town. There's an old reservoir there, frozen over most winters. I walked to the center and threw the painting as far as I could. It vanished beneath the ice with a crack that echoed across the fields. When I turned back toward the car, I saw a figure standing at the tree line, a tall shape, almost blending into the mist. No face, just stillness. By the time I blinked, it was gone. We moved out a few weeks later. My parents said the house was too drafty, too expensive to heat. Megan started seeing a therapist. She barely remembered any of it, only that she used to talk to someone upstairs. For a while, life almost felt normal. Then, a few months ago, I was walking home late. The streets were empty, the air so cold that my breath hung in front of me. And that's when I heard it again. 3 knocks, slow and hollow somewhere behind me. I turned, but there was no one there, just the thin fog rolling between the houses. I hurried inside and slammed the door. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was nothing, just memory playing tricks, until I went to hang up my coat. On the hallway wall, near the ceiling where the old attic hatch had once been, the paint had cracked in a perfect rectangle. A fine dust drifted down, like plaster being pushed from the other side. Then, from inside the wall I heard it, soft, unmistakable breathing, and a whisper, barely audible, "Tell him I'm still hungry." That was 5 years ago. I moved again, changed jobs, tried to forget. But every winter, when the nights are longest and the air turns cold enough for your breath to show, I swear I can hear knocking through the walls. Sometimes 3 times. Sometimes just once. And sometimes, if I'm unlucky enough to be awake at 3:17 in the morning, I hear a second breath beside my own. The last thing I see before I close my eyes is the faint outline of a handprint on the window, steaming against the glass, as if something out there in the frost is still waiting to be let inside. Thank you for listening to this true horror story. If you have a terrifying experience of your own, send it in to Mr. Nightmare. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell, because you never know when the next nightmare will begin.